The coat check attendant was still searching through the empty hangars when I saw my late husband's navy coat moving past the glass doors toward a donation van. My daughter caught my wrist and said the coat made it look like the family could not take care of me. I stayed quiet, memorized the charity's name, and watched Walter's coat disappear into the van. Have you ever watched someone make a decision about your life without asking you first? You are standing right there, but somehow they have already moved you out of the room. My name is Sandra Ellis. I am 71 years old and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan. For 36 years, I worked as the wardrobe supervisor at a community theater. I could fix a zipper during intermission and tell by touch whether a seam had been repaired by hand. I also helped my husband, Walter Ellis, build Ellis Architectural Lighting. The company started in our garage with 3 workbenches and a space heater that quit in hard weather. Walter tested fixtures while I prepared payroll envelopes at the kitchen table beside costume measurements and insurance forms. I kept the records, handled benefits, and maintained the shareholder files. It was simply what kept the doors open. Walter wore the navy coat when we signed our first hotel contract. He wore it again at his retirement dinner, though Isabel told him the shoulders looked old-fashioned. 3 months before he died, I found him in our bedroom running his thumb along the left lining. "Do not alter this seam, Sandys," he said, "not even to improve it." I laughed because I had repaired nearly every coat he had ever owned. He shook his head. "Some things stay safer where nobody thinks to look." I assumed he meant sentiment. Near the end, Walter sometimes spoke in pieces, especially when he was tired. After he died, I stepped away from daily operations. I did not sell my 34% ownership, and I did not surrender my vote. Still, Isabel and Dean began speaking for me. Isabel said I no longer followed the business. Dean stopped mailing the quarterly reports, and the lock on my old filing cabinet was replaced. Dean called it a security upgrade. I stood there with my hand on the new silver lock and told myself not to make too much of it. 2 weeks before the engagement party, a bank envelope arrived at my house. Transaction review was printed across the front. Isabel saw it on my kitchen table, picked it up, and said it was routine as advertising. She slid it into her leather tote before I opened it. I let her. That still bothers me. I knew better than to let anyone walk out with my mail, but she was my daughter, and at the time that felt like enough of an explanation. Instead of driving home from the hotel, I went back through the side entrance and asked for the manager. She brought me into a narrow office behind the front desk. A yellow lamp shone over a printer, a jar of paper clips, and the donation form Isabel had signed. Under authorization, she had written family representative. Under reason for donation, she had written downsizing for assisted living. I lived alone in the same brick house Walter and I had bought 32 years earlier. Assisted living had never been discussed with me. The manager said an attendant had heard Isabel call Walter's belongings clutter. I asked for a copy of the form. The paper was warm when it came out of the printer. I folded it once, then stopped at the contact section. The phone number listed for the owner of the property was Dean Mercer's. That was the first detail that made the whole thing feel planned. I had just reached the parking garage when Owen called my name. He came through the side door without a coat, rubbing his hands together. For 1 second, I thought he had followed on me to apologize. Instead, he offered to buy me a newer, more appropriate coat. I asked whether he was also planning to choose my room at assisted living. His mouth tightened. "Isabel has only been discussing options," he said. "You live alone. We worry." I asked how long those discussions had been happening. He looked through the glass toward the ballroom. My granddaughter stood under the gold lights while someone adjusted the flowers behind her. "This is her night, Mom. Please do not turn it into something else." I opened my car door and placed the donation form on the passenger seat. Owen waited for me to smooth things over. I got into the car. The heater blew cold air at first. No one came outside. At home, I left a bowl of soup untouched beside Walter's empty chair. The hook near the back door looked wrong without the coat. At 9:12 the next morning, my phone rang. The woman introduced herself as Rosa Delgado from Harbor House Community Resale. Her voice was steady and practical. She asked if I owned a navy wool men's coat with brass buttons and a label stitched inside that read S. Ellis. I sat down while checking donations. Rosa had heard something strike the metal sorting table from inside the lining. She found an old bank identification card and my name. I told her the coat had been donated without my permission. Bring identification and whatever proof you have, she said. I will keep it behind the desk. Harbor House was a low brick building beside a tire shop with winter slush on the mat and the smell of detergent inside. I showed Rosa my license, the hotel receipt, and a photograph of Walter wearing the coat. She compared the cuff and repaired buttonhole, then handed it back without ceremony. Near the left pocket, the lining had been closed with tiny hand stitches. I had spent too many years backstage not to notice the difference. Rosa let me use a small office behind the sorting room. Under the fluorescent light, I opened 3 stitches with a seam tool I carried in my purse. A brass key slipped into my palm. Behind it was the bank card and a folded strip of paper in Walter's handwriting. Calder Community Bank. Box 214. Under that, he had written, "Your vote stays with you, Sandy." My first thought was to call Isabel. I had her number open before the screen went dark, then remembered Dean's number on the donation form. The bank was 10 minutes away. A service officer named Miss Hanley checked the records. Box 214 was active and registered only to me. She paused at her computer and told me Dean had called twice during the previous month, asking how he could gain access as my financial representative. He had no valid authority, so the bank refused him. I asked if Isabel had called. Only Dean. The vault attendant led me into a private room. My key turned first, then hers, and the narrow drawer came out with a scrape. Inside was the original stock certificate, showing my 34% ownership in Ellis Architectural Lighting. Beneath it sat a notarized voting agreement and written confirmation that my rights had never been assigned to Isabel, Dean, Owen, or anyone else. I recognized the forms. Years earlier, I had prepared versions of them myself. The proposed sale could not pass without my vote. I asked for certified copies and put the originals back. My hands were steady until the vault door closed. I called Martin Hale, the company's former corporate secretary. Martin listened, then said he still had the official stock ledger and old board minutes. He had kept them because Dean once asked him to clean up an ownership gap before closing. What kind of gap? The kind that could stop the sale, he said. But the missing approval is not the worst part. Martin met me the next morning at a diner off Plainfield Avenue with the official ledger, board minutes, and a printed email from Dean. There was no transfer, no approval, and no doubt Dean knew the ownership problem existed. Martin slid another folder toward me and told me to speak with Naomi Pierce. Naomi represented the production employees. She met me that afternoon at the public library with a plain manila envelope. The family summaries called saw the sale. A strategic partnership. Naomi's appendix said 22 machines would move to Indiana within 90 days, closing the Grand Rapids workshop and eliminating 61 jobs. I knew many of those names. I had prepared their first pay envelopes and signed their benefit forms. Owen had been told the shop might shrink. He had not seen the full appendix. Dean had. Owen came to my house that evening. He stood beneath the kitchen light and admitted Isabel's and Dean had taken a home equity loan to finance a real estate project near Kalamazoo. The project had failed, and they needed the sale proceeds before the bank moved against their house. I asked if that was why Isabel had started talking about assisted living. Owen rubbed both hands over his face. I do not know when it became part of the plan, he said, but they needed your vote out of the way. I hated how much I still wanted one honest apology from either of them. Instead of calling Isabel, I called Caleb Ross at Calder Community Bank and asked him to keep the financing meeting on schedule. Dean texted that night. I only needed to attend, he said, and sign a routine retirement confirmation. 2 days later, I entered the third floor conference room wearing Walter's coat. Dean sat at the head of the walnut table. Isabel was beside him, holding a water glass with both hands. Owen sat farther down near the company accountant. Martin, Naomi, Caleb, and two representatives from the purchasing corporation were already there. A silver pen waited beside a document packet at my seat. Dean introduced me as Walter's widow, there to complete a formality, and pushed the pen toward me. I left it where it was. The original stock certificate went on the table first. The voting agreement followed. Dean reached for the certificate, but I covered it with my hand. He said I had transferred my rights to Isabel 2 years earlier. In a softer voice, meant for everyone else, he added that I might not remember every document I signed after Walter died. Isabel leaned toward me. We were trying to protect you from complicated decisions, Mom. I asked Martin to read the official ledger entry for my shares. He opened the book. There was no transfer. The board minutes showed no approval, and Martin placed Dean's email on the table. When Dean called the records outdated, Martin asked him to name where my rights had been reassigned. He could not. Caleb closed the financing folder. The bank could not fund a transaction based on inaccurate ownership records. The accountant confirmed the sale could not reach the required threshold without my vote. Dean called the appendix a contingency plan and said the relocation might never happen. Naomi placed it in front of Owen. He read the first page, then the second. His chair scraped backward. 61 jobs. The buyer's representative closed his folder. Isabel gripped the water glass. She said they had been protecting the family's future. I asked who had been protecting the futures of the 61 families hidden in the appendix. Then I looked at my daughter. You donated because you thought I had become part of the past. What you forgot was that the past still owned the deciding vote. The room went quiet. I voted against the sale. The approval failed. I requested Dean's suspension pending review of the ownership claim, his attempt to access my safe deposit box, his undisclosed debt, and the hidden relocation plan. I did not ask for revenge. I asked for procedure. The purchasing corporation withdrew before the meeting ended. Caleb closed the file. 6 weeks later, Dean carried 2 cardboard boxes out through the loading entrance. Naomi told me he did not use the front lobby. The review found that he had concealed his financial conflict and knowingly relied on defective records. He was removed and remained responsible for his debts. Isabel asked about the home equity loan during a counseling session. She kept turning a paper cup between her palms while I told her I would help her find financial advice, but I would not pay the debt for her. Owen kept his job, but lost his management role for 6 months. He went back to the workshop floor and worked beside the people he had failed to protect. I did not return to daily control. We formed an independent board with a financial professional, Naomi, as the employee representative and 1 limited family seat. We also created an employee ownership plan. Isabel and I still see each other at scheduled visits and counseling sessions. Her apologies come in pieces. I have accepted some of them. I have not handed back the keys. My granddaughter remained part of my life, and I never asked her to choose sides. On cold mornings, Walter's coat hangs by the back door where I can reach it. The seam is repaired, but the key stays in a locked box under my own name. Sometimes stepping back is healthy. Disappearing is not the same thing. If this story stayed with you, stay with the channel for more stories about dignity, family, and starting over.